originally, when I laid this out with the Better Together class, I was originally planning to do this in 8 weeks. They said, slow it down, please. Turned that into 18 weeks. I was downstairs with Generations, turned into 22 weeks. You're in for the long haul. If you disapprove of that, you vote by your absence. And we're down to 5 people. I'll say, yeah, that didn't work so well. But nonetheless, I'm going to try to keep it interesting, engaging, applicable for you. Just a little bit about myself. I talked a little bit about my wife, Joyce, who's here, 8 kids, 24 grandkids, and no twins, all one at a time. So if you're a woman in my family, you got a lot of hard work ahead of you. That's just the way it goes. But personally, educationally, I grew up in Indiana. I went to Taylor University, which is a parallel school to Bethel. I was a psychology major. Then I went to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in Illinois. I got my MDiv. First church I served was at the KOST Evangelical Free Church near North Branch. That was in 1977. I was there for not quite 10 years, 4 years in Illinois. Came back in 1991 to Isanti County, where I was a pastor of the Oxlip Evangelical Free Church for 32 years. Along the way, I picked up a THM in church history from Bethel, so I'm kind of a Baptist. I mean, I'm almost a Baptist. Actually, I was thinking about that, and then my wife and I were first married. We went to a new church which was starting in Forest Lake, Illinois, called Church of the Redeemer, which was a conference church. And I have a seminary degree from your seminary, and I guess I've kind of come full circle. I'm back. and it's good to be back. And what I'm going to do along the way is kind of help, not only, in a sense, teach the book of Revelation, but also help you to understand the broader context of the book of Revelation so that things start making sense for you. And once you get and you grasp the intent, the broader context, you understand, in a sense, to whom the book of Revelation was written, how would they have understood it, then you start to develop kind of what's called a hermeneutical arc to help us to understand how we should understand it. And the basic thing is this, that when it comes to the study of Scripture, and I was talking to Mike ahead of time this morning, and that is understanding the Bible is a complex task because the Bible is not a book, as it were, that we understand books. You know, it is basically a library of books, 66 of them in all, and they have to be understood in terms of, to whom they were written, when were they written, what was the context in which they were written, and to realize that basically understanding the Bible is not only looking at a library of books, but basically it's listening in on someone else's conversation. And the fact is that in someone else's conversation, there's a lot of things which are understood between those who are having the conversation, which aren't necessarily easily understood for us. So we have to do a lot of things that build into it and our understanding of it. Now, there are basically 4 different approaches to understanding the book of Revelation. One is the preterist, which simply means the end. In other words, it was really intended for the Christians who were the immediate recipients of this, who were the members of the 7 churches which are there. You see it really, stated very bluntly, where he says to the 7 churches which are in, and then it's said again that the Spirit is writing to the 7 churches, and it lists them in order. We'll talk about kind of significance of that next week. But it starts with Ephesus and it ends with Laodicea. And there are messages which are there for those particular churches. However, it's really written for the church as a whole. Because these churches would have been reading the letters written to the other churches. And there's a composite which is there. There are 7 of them. Talk about this a little bit later. The number 7 is very, very significant. It comes up a lot. And when you see, the fact is that you have 7 lampstands, 7 churches, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls of wrath, which are there along the way. There are 7 portraits of Christ. There are 7 times in which the world comes to an end. Okay, little complex. I'll help you to make it understand. Preterist, pertaining to Christians who are alive in the first century. Very important for us to understand, because there are things which are referred to which would have been easily understood by the Christians in the first century. We are listening in on this particular conversation, and then we're drawing some parallels which are there. A view which is really not widely held, it's the historicist view, and that is that it refers to various epochs of human history, and I'll refer to it at times, I'll explain it in a few weeks, in the dispensational field of thought, which has hugely influenced the church, Western church, especially in the 20th and 21st century. It really refers to 7 epochs of the church. And you might have heard somebody say that we live in the Laodicean age. No, it really doesn't work all that well, and it's an artificial kind of a construct. But at the time of the Reformation, it was in Martin Luther's understanding of the book of Revelation. He clearly believed that the church was the beast. He wrote a tract, very famous tract, entitled The Babylonian Captivity of the Church, and it helped, in a sense, to understand the context which is there. Largely a view which is not held. Most popular view, the futurist. The futurist view says that everything which was given in the book of Revelation pertains to the future. Again, in dispensational thought, they come to chapter 4, in which John is caught up into heaven, and they say, yes, that's the rapture. Christians are now with Jesus, and everything which happened from chapter 4 to the end, all the bad stuff which is there, as the poor suckers are still alive at that time. And we kind of distance ourselves from it, which is really not very, very helpful. Fourth approach, and that is the redemptive idealist view, which says, hey, these things happened for us to learn, and there are endless lessons which exist for the church at all time to understand what it is that God is speaking to us, and really to help to give us a good context of the things which are going on. Now, one of the things I'm going to come up with a lot is this whole idea of context. A text out of context is always a pretext. Judas went out and hung himself. Go thou and do likewise. Both of those are the passages of the Bible. But you can take, in a sense, passages and cherry pick them, and you can make the Bible say basically whatever you want. Dangerous things. What is the context? What's the historical context? Historical context at the time was that probably this was written that John was on Patmos, sometimes in the late 60s. Who was on the throne? Who was Caesar at the time? It was Nero. Important to understand, who was Nero? He was a king he was a man who became king because his mother Agrippina assassinated his uncle Claudius when he was 16 years of age. He was early years, he was under the tutelage of some of the wisest, actually consuls in Rome at the time, one of which was Seneca. There was a time early of progress. It was a time followed later by extravagance, tyranny, artistic ambition. He thought of himself as being a poet. He wasn't, which ultimately led to his downfall. In 64 AD, key time, Rome burned. 7/8 of the city went up in flames. It was built in highly flammable material close together. There was no fire brigade, which was there. Nero was out of town at the time. It's kind of jokingly that Rome burned while Nero fiddled. I think that's mythology, which was there. But the fact is, Nero took the blame for it, didn't want to take the blame for it. Somebody had to be blamed for it, even though that at any given time in Rome, because of the size, there would have been at least 1,000 open fires going on, because that's how you cook your meal and hook. So it's just kind of like Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over the lantern in Chicago in the late 1860s. It was a place just ready to go up in flames. Somebody had to take the fall. And it was easy to take a fall on a group of individuals who were seen as being kind of troublemakers. They had this crazy idea that some guy who had got nailed to a cross had somehow risen again from the dead. And they claimed him to be God. And as a result of that, Tacitus, who is a contemporary historian, speaks about the fact that they were labeled as such, and so Christians were easy targets. They had no defense. They had no way of defending themselves. The first thing that Nero did was to take out the key leaders, which is a way of killing a movement. So both Peter and Paul were executed at this particular time. John was a social prisoner, so as a result of that, he was exiled onto Patmos. And the whole idea was to eradicate and stamp this movement out as quickly as they could. Okay, picture yourself as being part of that. You've given everything. You're vulnerable. Your job's on the line. You're not going to get hired to be a substitute teacher because you're a Christian. Not going to happen. The fact is, I was talking with a friend of mine whose son-in-law was a colonel to be really on the line to become a first-star general. And basically his superior took him aside and said, "You're not the right flavor." Meaning you don't fit what was at that particular time the DEI expectations. And you're a Christian, that's not going to happen. That kind of discrimination is not old, it's current, which is there. It was on steroids in the first century. And so you understand that particular context. Nero had no trouble executing his mother, Agrippina. He executed his first wife. He executed his second wife. He really didn't care at all. That's context. Looking at the book of Revelation, you have to understand what's the immediate context versus before and after the entire book of Revelation, what's the flow of it, and also the historical background, because of the fact that it is based upon Old Testament understanding. 404 verses in the book of Revelation, 278 direct quotations from the Old Testament, over 500 references, quotations, and allusions from the Old Testament in the book of Revelation. So how do you understand the book of Revelation?
Old Testament.
You got to understand the Old Testament. What you read in today's newspaper or see on the today's news, forget it. That is not your way of understanding the book of Revelation. You can take a passage of book of Revelation, pin it to any historical event, any contemporaneous event, and draw a parallel. We've been doing that for about 150 years now. It's not worked out too well. So let's move on. Numbers 4, 12, 24, 144,000 have symbolic significance. I'll unpack that later. There's symbolic language. And we come to the first of it in chapter 1, where Jesus is portrayed for us through symbolic representation as fully God. Let's read the text. John 9. I'm just going to go down to John. Let me just go back a little bit. It's written as a letter. Same kind of salutation that you have in Paul's letters, Peter's letters, Jude's letter, James' letters, begins with identifying who's the author. John, verse 4, to the 7 churches there in Asia. Typical salutation, grace and peace to you. God's empowerment, his strength, And then it is a reminder who God is. And it describes it for this. It describes him, who he is, who is grace and peace from him who was, is to come. 7 churches, Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, says concerning him who loves us. And that is typical, which is there. And then it's also a reminder to God's people who they are. I appreciate very much Eugene Peterson, and someone who always pastored smaller congregations, who said that the New Testament does not know successful churches as we want to describe them today. In the thousands, in the tens of thousands, the megachurch 20 years ago was 1,000 plus. Megachurch now is 2,000 plus. Just to name names, Eagle Brook, it's another class of itself. It's called a giga church. You have to be 20,000 or more. I'm going to let somebody else evaluate that. We tend to evaluate the fact if we're not as big as somebody else, we're not very significant. What the New Testament knows is this. It knows nothing of what we commonly know as a successful church. What it knows is this. It is communities of redeemed believers who gather together and appoint one of their own to remind them, first of all, who they are, and secondly, what it is that God would have them do. And so what does the text tell us about who we are? He loves us, and what is this? He says this, the one who has made us to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God. This is who we are. Exodus 19, verse 4, saying of the nation of Israel, you are to be a kingdom and priests, as in the future. Here, the tense of the verb changes and says, you are. Now, and that word echoes for 20 centuries. A kingdom and priests to serve our God and Father. What do you do if you're part of a kingdom? You serve, or you have a place. You have significance. Paul would say in Philippians chapter 3, our citizenship is where? In heaven. Yes, exactly. And that in a sense we know that where we belong. If we belong in heaven, what's our relationship to earth? We're visiting, yeah. Peter would say, you are strangers and aliens. You're transitional here. Okay, so what does it mean to be a priest? 2 things. One is this. A priest, basically the word, when the Latin Vulgate was translated, utilized the term pontifex. That's familiar to us. We think of the Pope. But the word was actually a secular word which meant a bridge builder. You and I are bridge builders. We represent humanity before God, and the converse, we represent God before humanity. That's who we are. Then we have the description which is given to us concerning Jesus. Verse 12. Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. And I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstands, one like standing, a son of man, clothed with a long white robe, in golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white like snow, like wool. His eyes were like the flame of life. His feet like the burnished bronze, refined in a furnace. And his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and from his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was shining like that of the sun in full strength. Moving up to this, you find Jesus being described as being, first of all, fully God. which is there. He is the Trinity, which is listed for us in verse 4. It says this, grace to you and peace from him who was and is to come, God the Father. From the seven spirits, don't get sidetracked with this notion of the seven as literally that there are seven spirits kind of out there working. Seven numerically means a completion as it is in heaven. 4 is completion as it means on earth. We'll revisit this later on. 7 spirits, the complete Spirit of God. I believe that's the Holy Spirit which is there. And then he says concerning him, from the spirits who are before the throne, and from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, firstborn among the dead. 2 titles which are very, very significant. Firstborn meaning first of a kind, but also firstborn always has to do with first in a matter of priority and order and significance. In the Old Testament, if you were the firstborn son, you had great significance in terms of the heritage of the family. You also had great responsibility. And you were rewarded for it. That's why the eldest son got 2/3 of the estate, the youngest son got 1/3. But the fact is, it was a point of privilege, great privilege, to be firstborn. Firstborn among the dead, implying that there are more who are coming, who will be resurrected from the dead. And that is, of course, us, who will be resurrected. And he says, concerning him, that the ruler of kings of earth. Think how that would have flown in Nero's court. What do you mean there's another king? Not only another king, but a king over me? I mean, put it this way, Nero was the first to erect statues of himself in all of the marketplaces, of all of the places all around the planet, and he was the first to have incense which would be there, and it was expected if you burned the incense, you put some of the ash on your face or on your forehead. Want to curry favor with a ruler, a monarch, an autocrat, you appease them. But Christians didn't do that. Isn't it kind of reminiscent of the story of Mordecai in the book of Esther? Where'd that get him? An old pile of trouble. But he's reminding us, we're not of this world. We're not citizens here. Our citizenship is in heaven. We don't have to bow to that. And we will not say Caesar is Lord because we know that Jesus is Lord. And so you have this going on, which is there, the reference to the Trinity. The claim in verse 8 that God the Father says of himself, I am the Alpha and the Omega. In verse 17, which was the first and last of the Greek alphabet, we're familiar with that. Verse 17, there's a parallel statement where Jesus says of himself, I'm the first and the last. So if God the Father says of himself, I'm Alpha and Omega, and Jesus says, I'm the first and the last, what's the implications of that? He is implying his deity. Yes, absolutely, which is there. Then you have 3 I am statements. We're familiar with that. We go back to the book of Genesis, in which, Abraham was brought before the throne, and you have the I am statements in terms of, Moses is asked in the book of Exodus, who shall I say that has sent me? Well, say I am that I am has sent you. And the fact is that, humanly speaking, we can never say that I am, because after I said that, I'd have to say I was. We can't, because we're locked in time. And so when Jesus would talk about himself being I am, the Jews understood the implication of that. People say, well, Jesus really never claimed to be God. Well, yeah. If you can't read literature, and if you don't understand context, and if you don't understand the innuendo, if you don't understand who you're talking to, and the fact is that there are some things that we immediately understand. And let me ask you this question. Where were you? What were you doing on the morning of 9/11? What now?
I wasn't born.
Well, didn't worry. I wasn't talking to you. You're listening in on this conversation. But the fact is, for those of us who were alive and aware of what was going on, I realize it's 30 years ago, but the fact is, we knew exactly. I remember pulling into the parking lot at the Cambridge the old Cambridge nursing home, which is now the library. Listening to the radio, I had a meeting because I was chairing the spiritual life committee at the church at that home at that particular time, and I thought, this is terrifying. When Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am, the Pharisees are saying, no, you're not. And they wanted to kill him for that. They got that. You have the repeating of this. You have references to the Son of Man. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to the book of Daniel. Very significant passage because it comes up, several different times that which is there in the text. And you have in Daniel chapter 7, and I'm missing a page of my notes, so I got to go there myself. But in Daniel chapter 7, you have a series of visions in which there are four beasts. It's kind of the unfolding of human history. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Assyria, ultimately Rome, which is there. And then you have this vision of God himself. And he says this in verse 13. I saw night visions, behold, with clouds there came one like the Son of Man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. To him was given dominion, glory, kingdom, all peoples, all nations, languages should serve him. His dominion was an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one that shall not be destroyed. Do you get the audacity of this? Something which is not going to be destroyed, something which is going to be coming, is going to be sovereign. You had just had, in that particular context, a review of history looking forward of Babylon, of Medo-Persia, of Assyria, and ultimately of Rome. And here he's saying, all these things are going to pass away. One like the Son of Man, which is there, okay? Let me fast forward to the New Testament. 2/3 of the way into Jesus' ministry, he was with his disciples in a very fascinating place. You find this in Mark chapter 13 at Caesarea Philippi. And you have, which was significant in itself, because Caesarea Philippi, there was emperor worship, there was worship of the Greek god Pan, and there was also a place which was known as the gates of hell, which was there. He was talking to a Jewish audience. Do we hear kind of the religious panoply which is there? He's standing at the background of this, and he's saying, who do people say that I am? Who do people say that the Son of Man is? Oh, what's he claiming there? He's aligning himself with something far greater than himself. We saw that back when Barack Obama ran for president. Where did he go to announce his presidential candidacy? He went to Springfield, Illinois. He stood on the steps of the Capitol there. Why? Because he wanted to associate himself with Abraham Lincoln. And he wanted to go to Germany. He wanted to speak at the Brandenburg Arch. And the German said, you got to earn this one, pal. You're not talking here. And so when he says, I saw one like the Son of Man, what do you think would have been in the minds of those Jewish believers who had grown up studying the book of Daniel? Understanding that there was going to be a time in which a sovereign would appear. Let's go on. You have one who holds the keys of death and Hades. Well, that's pretty audacious, isn't it? Going to say, I control life and death, and I control eternal destiny. And then he says, I was the one who is dead and is alive forevermore. Then he's described. Long robe, golden sash. What would be in the context of someone wearing a long robe, golden sash, would have been a priest. His hairs of head were white. Now, we just talked about the Son of Man. If you go to verse 9 of chapter 7 of Daniel, you have the Ancient of Days, which is, I believe, a description of God the Father. And he has hairs of head which are white. Now, let me just say this, kind of do a pause here, that the book of Revelation is full of a lot of metaphor. These metaphors get put together in all sorts of different ways. Because the whole idea is not for us to come and kind of minutely dissect everything. Keep in mind that the book of Revelation is a visual book. 52 times, John would say, and I saw. And the whole idea is to overwhelm our own circuits, as it were, with an impression of the greatness and the grandeur of Jesus Christ. So you have the Son of Man, who also has the hairs of white, as does God the Father. Simply saying, we're not talking about two different deities, we're talking about one in different ways, which is there. He has eyes of flaming fire. I would suggest to you as a symbol of God, Jesus' role as a judge. He will come again, the creed says, to judge the living and the dead. He died as a savior. He returns as a judge. He has a voice like that of mighty roaring waters, hearkening back to Ezekiel chapter 4 and one of the visions which he had there. In his right hand, he says concerning him, he holds the 7 stars. Now, what are the 7 stars? Well, the point is you don't speculate. You allow the context to determine things. You're back in Revelation chapter 1. And just let you know, I realize it's 10:30, and I know that for many of you, I have to end sharply at 10:35 because you have a long, arduous, perilous journey, which is filled with distractions by your friends, to make it from here to the center. I want you to get there on time. So I'm going to absolve myself of all responsibilities very quickly in 5 minutes. Just relax. We'll get there. You realize that there are 3 things that annoy wives about their husbands, about their men partners?
Only 3.
Well, there's 3 major things. I think that I've really, frankly, I've been married to Joyce for, next year will be 50 years. I know that there are a lot more things than the 3 which are there, but the 3 salient things that really annoy women about their men. It's this. First of all, they talk too much. When you want to go, you're in a hurry, you've got guests coming home, they talk too much. Second thing is, they stay too long. They're just never particularly in a hurry, which is there. And the third thing is, they walk too slow. Entirely too slow. But nonetheless, you have one who holds the 7 stars, and the context is this, concerning this. Let's go to verses 17 and following. I'm going to verse last end of it. That he says, fear not, I am the first and the last, the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. Write therefore the things that you have seen, those that are and those that are to take place. As for the mysteries of the 7 stars, now it's very significant because this is only one of 2 places, I think, or 3 places in the book of Revelation in which you have the symbols interpreted for us. We got to work hard for the others, real hard. As for the stars, I lost my place. As for the mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand, and the golden seven lampstands, and the seven stars. The seven stars are the angels of the seven churches. Well, are they? I mean, they're really interesting kind of things. Not part of the scope of this study, but we've not really given a whole lot of thought as Protestants to angels. We really don't. They show up a lot. They have significant roles. Does that mean that each of the churches has a particular angel assigned to it? Others would suggest that the angels, the word angelos means messenger, and the messenger would be the pastor. Either way, that's not the important thing. Who's holding the stars? Jesus is. Yeah. And the seven lampstands are the seven churches. And where is this majestic, glorious God of glory positioned in reference to the lampstands?
In the
Right
center.
Right in the middle. Right in the middle. Yeah, he's right in the center of all of the lampstands. What is that? Again, you start to visualize this thing, and everything has its own implications. That even though there is a sequence which is given, we'll get into next week, of the seven churches, there's not a priority. One church is not more important than another. We'll find that they all need to be connected to Jesus. And Jesus walks among the churches as he walks amongst First Baptist to remind us who he is, who we are, and what it is that he would have us do. Got 90 seconds for a question. That's okay. They'll come up. Along the way, if it's a question that pertains to what we're talking about, feel free to interrupt me. Because I'm not worried about getting what needs to be done. I can always talk fast if I need to. And but the fact is, what you have here is that Jesus, in all of his glory, in all of his resurrected power, one who is priest and king, who holds all authority, who is the ruler of the kings of earth, walks amongst his church. And he's here. Isn't that good? Good, no? Father, thank you that you remind us of who we are. You remind us of what you want to accomplish. Keep this foremost in our minds. Let us not get distracted by the news events of the day. But let us get enthralled with your power, your glory.